Starts out with a snore. Hi. Welcome to Alberta to Arizona. I'm Tracie Gray. I'm a real estate investor and hosting today. And then with me in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada is Devin Gray from EXP Realty as well as Mogul Realty Group. And then across the border down in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, we've got Diane Brennan who's with Coldwell Banker, and we're talking about the differences and advantages to owning real estate in both Canada and the United States.
And we have to explain first of all why you're laughing, because your dog is snoring.
I was
So
hoping
Tracie
if I
was
talked
laughing.
loud enough you couldn't hear it.
Yeah, well, we have to explain why you're laughing at the start, right? So
Yeah.
people don't like inside baseball. They wanna know what's going on.
Yeah, so if you hear our sound effects in the background that sound like a dog snoring very loudly,
Because it is, yes.
that's right.
Yeah, and she wasn't up until just when we started recording. And then
Yeah,
Literally said,
Murphy's law
record.
for sure. Murphy's law. So
Yeah.
we're dealing with high interest rates here, like you guys are. You had some big news, right, about interest rates, the Bank of Canada increasing interest
Again.
rates again.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the guarantee was that they would. The question was by how much, and I think that a full percentage points like they did in July would have, I think, really rocked the markets. But with inflation going down a little bit in July, I think that caused them to ease off a little bit. So it did increase another 0.75%. That's the fifth increase. That's the fastest time that they've increased rates in since the early 90s. And it's I think now not so much that people are thinking, oh my gosh, interest rates are so high. I think everybody's kind of got back to the idea that, okay, we're at pre-COVID levels, but it's just happened so fast. But at the same time, interest rates came down really fast during the early parts of COVID. So it's just a big adjustment period. But every time that these come out, and it sounds like you're experiencing the same thing in Phoenix, is that every time the interest rates go up, it takes another percentage amount of buyers out of the system and causes them to stand on the sidelines and kind of wait to see what's going to happen. Conversely, we've got a lot of sellers that are going, well, the world is uncertain. I want out. I want to sell my property. So we've got a classic buyer's market, too many listings for the amount of sellers that are out there. And I think it's going to be it'll be an interesting fall because, there's still some buyers out there, but it's definitely cooling off in Canada with the number of buyers that are interested in purchasing a property in the next few months.
So we're kind of in a balanced market, but I don't know how long that's going to last. So with interest rates, our buyers are kind of confused. And I like to tell people, if you need to buy a home, then buy a home, because now you have your pick, where for months and years, people were just having to bid over list price just to get into something that they not just for shelter. It's not something necessarily that they loved. There were homes that weren't repaired, so they're going to have to put money into it, and just in order to get a home. So now we have went from 4,000 listings to 19,000. So now you have a great choice. And if you're worried about interest rates, we here in the US can refinance with no prepayment penalty. USA, that's the dig, right? But if you're buying in the US, there's no prepayment penalty. You can roll the cost of the loans into the total mortgage, and you can refinance. Interest rates are expected to get into the fours in 2023. That's what the mortgage experts are saying. So, but here's what happens. And I'd like to tell buyers who are sitting on the fence, if you're sitting on the fence and you're waiting for interest rates to lower, well, what happens when interest rates lower? Then more buyers come onto the market. There's more competition. So if you go in, get the appreciation, get into a home, you can refinance with no prepayment penalty, and at least gain that equity, and you have a home. You're not renting and paying someone else's mortgage. So this is what I'm telling my clients. Sellers, it's completely frustrating. They're going to have to pack their patience because, and they have to have their homes in tip-top shape. And I think we've talked about this, and anyone can check out our previous videos on YouTube as well. You have to put your best foot forward for sure.
Yeah, a question for you in regards to the idea that you can refinance at any time without payments and stuff like that. That is a significant advantage in Canada. It's really about locking in, but if you lock in now and interest rates continue to go up, you're locked in. But so why is it that things, is it just that people don't know that enough down in the States? Like, why is it that if you know you can do that with refinancing at any time, as soon as interest rates go down, why would people be waiting?
Because everyone here has PTSD from the market crash. So there are people that are just bent on thinking that prices are going to come down a lot. So I was talking just actually this morning before we started doing this to one of my Canadian clients. And I said, well, now's a good time to buy, because they had sold their property here in the spring and, took advantage of the high prices. But she still wants to buy here. And, she said, well, there's this condo. I said, well, now's a good time to buy because you don't have that competition. You don't have to overpay. And she goes, well, but it's still, when I first looked at the condo 12 years ago, it was $80,000. Now it's 300. So I think the mentality is for American buyers and Canadian is that prices are going to drop down to when we had smoking deals when the market crashed here. That we have no indication that that's going to happen, so.
Yeah.
So it's the classic trying to wait to time the the market, waiting for the, but you never know until prices start going back up and you go, that's what it was. I guess I should have bought.
If we could live our lives in hindsight, I'd be a billionaire. But
yes,
I mean, if you could
right.
afford to wait, then fine. But there's a lot of people that need shelter and, need to find a home. So, I mean, don't kick yourself. People get hung up on the interest rate too. Talk to a mortgage professional and find out exactly what your payment is going to be. So you know what you're dealing with. It's not as scary as it seems. I know when I purchase a property, and you guys too, when you have to lock in that rate, you're all stressed out because it's like, well, what if it's lower tomorrow? But it's not that much of a difference in the long run. And a good mortgage lender or mortgage broker will tell you and break that down for you. So you're not sitting there. Do you guys have to lock in, or do you just get what the bank gives you?
Lock into the mortgage?
Yeah. So here, what happens is the loan officer will say, okay, we've got to lock it in. It's not like this is what the interest rate is. We have to lock in on the day, the hour, because they keep going, fluctuating. So here in the US, you have to decide when to lock in. So when you lock in, that's your rate. So, and it could go up, down, whatever. So we're always in a panic, like, oh my gosh, we're always stuck on, what if it's lower tomorrow? But, in the scheme of things, look at your overall picture. Don't panic about that. See exactly what, a half or a quarter% is going to make on your mortgage payment, and just, live your life. So if you're nickel and diming over that, I mean, it's always good to get a lower price and then messing with your interest rate, because interest rate, you will save more money if it's lower. But break down those numbers and just don't assume that it's all doom and gloom. Look at your personal financial picture and have someone explain that to you.
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely agree. And it's interesting about purchasing a home to live in is that is and should still be the number one reason why people look to buy a house. But obviously over the course of the past probably 20 to 25 years, people look at it as just as much as a savings vehicle or an investment vehicle and stuff like that. And it is interesting that they get caught up a little bit in regards to if they purchase this house, if you purchase a stock and then you look to see whether or not the very next day, if it dropped and you're just in a panic, oh my God, I made a big, but over the course of the long period, the stock might turn around. I mean, everything changes, and the same thing does happen in real estate, but people can drive themselves crazy by waiting for that perfect price and what is that, and then the same thing with the rates. And just to kind of I think answer what you're suggesting. So people go and get pre-approved from their banks, and they are given a particular rate that usually can last anywhere from 90 days to 120 days, and it would never go up, but if the rate goes down, they can qualify for that lower rate. And so then they have 90 or 120 days. Some people go a full 6 months with that guaranteed pre-approval rate. And then when they purchase a property and go through the process of getting the property appraised and working on getting yourself locked into whether or not it's an open or a closed or a variable or a fixed, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, then you get locked in for that time period. And so if somebody says, okay, well, I'm going to lock in at 4.25% on a fixed rate for 5 years, then they pay that for 5 years, 4.25, 5 years, and then basically usually about 6 months, sometimes 9, but usually 6 months, excuse me, before that term comes up, you can then start to talk about renewing. And if it looks like rates are going to go down, then you can delay, or else if rates are at a low and it looks like rates might be going up, you can lock in, you can renew and do a new mortgage rate. So it's not as flexible as what you're talking about, but if you're in for that 3 or 4 or 5 year term, you basically are set with that payment and that term for that time period.
Yeah. And I've said before, that's crazy to me. Like, life change here, we do 30-year mortgages. So, what stability and peace of mind to know what your payment is going to be for 30 years, not having to worry about, like, a lot can change in 1 year, never mind 3 or 4 years or
Yeah.
whatever terms Canadians can get. So what if someone loses their job? But then you did explain to me before that the bank that you're with will automatically renew it at the new rate. You don't have to requalify again.
Right.
Unless you
No.
want to shop for a different rate.
That's right. That's right. So if you're in a situation where, especially if the house happens to be worth less, or for sure, is that they will continue to take care of that mortgage. But ultimately, if let's say at that same example, you've been on a 5-year fixed and you're at 6 months out, and you want to shop around, or maybe you were with the bank and now you want to work with a mortgage broker. So you'll phone that mortgage broker, but you do have to go through the whole application process. You've got to provide all your financial information and all that stuff, because he then needs to take that information and shop it around to those various lenders.
And if you or your spouse lose their job, you're not making as much money. You may not qualify for that new mortgage rate.
Not if you're necessarily going to be wanting to shop around. You most likely are going to want to work with the bank or the lender that you're with, and they will give you various options. Again, you've got open and closed and fixed and variables and different term lengths. I mean, you could sign up for a 20-year fixed or usually 10 years, but the rates are a lot higher, right? And so that's why people and yeah, for sure. I mean, the banks are ultimately going to provide the products that are most appealing to where they're going to try to make some money. I mean, let's be frank, banks are for-profit businesses and they're out to make money.
But so it's easier to stay with the bank you're already with when you refinance,
Of
because
course,
you don't have
yes.
to, it's only unless you want a better rate and to go with someone else.
That's
So
correct.
what is I know we're agents, so the experts are the loan officers, but do you know what your average is now, just to compare Canada and the US? So right now, like, we're at 6% for 30 years.
Yeah, so the number that because we deal with so many investors, and so if you're an investor, your investor rate is potentially going to be higher, or most likely going to be higher. So right now, for investors that are looking to go with a variable, which most investors do because they want that flexibility, there's not as big of a payout penalty if it's fixed. With a variable mortgage, you only have 3 months worth of interest to pay out to break that mortgage. Right now, we're at 5.45%.
And that's for how many years?
Basically, a variable, again, that would be a conversation with your lender depending on how many years, but usually most of them are 3 to 5 years. Yeah.
So ours is 6% for 30. America. Okay. It's just interesting, the differences, it's interesting.
It is. And the only thing that I sit back and bite my tongue every time you bring this up is that we don't have hundreds of banks that go out of business every 5 or 10 years and people losing their homes all over the place. Is that, yes, we have a lot more structure and rigidity to it, but that's also to keep the industry afloat and to see less people losing their homes. We didn't go through the crisis that you guys went through back in 2008, 2009. We didn't have millions of people losing their homes. So we never have.
That was predatory lending, right? So that was the problem. Yeah.
So we don't get into any of that. There is none of that stuff that happens here. It is a lot more of a conservative, not necessarily as capitalistic as the U.S. is, for sure. And there are definitely some advantages, and I think that there's a lot of people that would like things to be a lot more open. I've had several conversations, especially with BC, moving away from mortgage conversation. We've talked in the past about certain certain items that you have in place down in the Arizona area. Same thing with BC that we don't have in Alberta. And like why things seem to be a little more loose, and there are a lot of people that enjoy that. They want the flexibility to be not rigid in regards to having to fill out certain pieces of paperwork and stuff like that, and keep a lot more of the decision making in the hands of the buyers and the sellers. I think that with all of that stuff, there are pros and cons for sure. I think that I definitely see a lot of merits to where things are at in the United States, and yet at the same time, I think there's a lot of benefits to what goes on in Canada, because it does allow a lot more protectionism. Like, for one of the things as well that I don't think is in the States, but there's a stress test that people have to go through up here, which means that they will actually have, and I can't remember the spread, again, if we had a mortgage broker on, he'd be able to tell you, but basically you have to be able to qualify. I mentioned about 5.45% for the variable. You actually have to qualify for a higher amount. I believe it might even be an extra percentage point higher. That's the number that you have to qualify for, and that is a stress test to say, hey, if interest rates go up, can you still afford to purchase this property? As opposed to just saying, yeah, because some people will basically go and say, oh, okay, I can qualify for a $500,000 home at 5.45%. I'm going to go out and find that $500,000 property. And they really ultimately shouldn't be at that level, because they're maxing out. So what they'll do is they'll say, okay, you have to try to qualify at, say, 6% or 6.5%. It's only going to qualify you to purchase a $450,000 property, which
Right.
puts them in a position where, A, they're not maxing out every last dollar to pay for the house, and number two, if rates do go up, they already know in advance that they're able to qualify or to handle that payment. Do people like it? Not really, because it means that they have to buy, they can only buy less house. But on the other hand, it is ultimately taking care of people that really just, financially might not necessarily be as responsible as they should be.
Right. So here, because of the predatory letting situation and the market crashing, it's very stringent. So that's in Arizona, we go through the pre-qualification process. Like, before a person even writes an offer, they have to be completely pre-qualified where everything's checked. And even some people go through underwriting already. So there's a lot of changes that have been made to the legal industry. My concern is, what if I can't afford the house after 4 years or whatever the term is in Canada? But from what you tell me, you don't have to requalify again. So even if both people lost their jobs in 5 years or whenever their term is due and they have to refinance, they will still get a mortgage.
Yeah. So what happens is, if for example, we've got a rental property, and it's with CIBC, and basically we just get a renewal notice, and it's just basically pick what works best for you. You might get on the phone with a mortgage advisor and kind of talk about the circumstances. They might ask a couple of questions in regards to what's what's going on with the property, and talk about whether or not it makes most sense to sign up only for a year or 3 years or 5 years. We had a property that we sold last year, and basically we went through that exact situation where we didn't sign up. It was also with CIBC. We renewed, and the conversation was, I think we're going to probably sell this property in the next couple of years. So the recommendation is, well, why don't you sign up for a variable, which means the penalty is only 3 months interest, and only sign up for 2 years, and then we'll see where things go from there. And so we did, and a year later we sold the property, and our payout was $1,200.
Okay.
So there is that. It's
Yeah.
more so if you are a first-time home buyer. Obviously you're shopping around, you're trying to get qualified, or if you just simply want to see what the best rates are. That's a whole other conversation as well, in regards to some people obviously want to deal with the banks because of relationships, but the banks only offer up their products. If you go with a mortgage broker, they have 24 lenders. They've got the big banks. They also have B lenders, people that all they do is mortgages. Half the time people have never even heard of these companies, because all they do is mortgages, and they're called B lenders, which is just simply that they just have different products, and they're not the big five banks. and interesting enough, you could potentially get a better rate from say TD or CIBC going through a mortgage broker than you could going with your actual bank. Not always, and sometimes the bank will actually beat the broker because they want to keep the bank or keep the business.
Right.
But ultimately, it's if you have a great relationship and the banks have a clear role in working with homeowners, and a lot of times, a lot of this conversation I'm having with is because of investors, right? People are looking at getting 5, 6, 7, 9 mortgages. Certain banks have different rules. So for example, CIBC might say, well, we can give you 3 mortgages, but that's it. And if you have mortgages with anybody else, we're not giving you any mortgages. So you might get your first 3 with CIBC. Then you might jump over to TD Bank, who says, well, we don't have a problem with you having 3 mortgages with someone else. We'll give you another 2 mortgages, but then you're capped out with us. Well, then you might have
shop
to
around.
Yeah, that's right. And then you have to potentially go to another lender, like a Homex or I'm sorry, I'm forgetting that person's name, or Olympia Trust or something like that, or somebody that ultimately is like a B lender.
Like a hard money lender?
No, they're not hard money lenders. They're just called B lenders. Like they're not full banks. They're banks
Okay.
that simply only do mortgages.
Yeah. Okay.
And what it does is, and that's why the benefit of working with a mortgage broker who's an investor is that, because sometimes people will get in and get stuck. They find they're tapped out and can't get any more mortgages at say 4 or 5 mortgages because they didn't work with a broker who can map out to get to the maximum amount, which I keep hearing is around 9 or 10, and then pretty much every bank is uncomfortable with you having that many mortgages, and then you have to start getting into either seller financing or finding a joint venture partner that's prepared to continue on and carry those mortgages. And then
Interesting. Yeah. Well, so I can see where you're protected in Canada as long as you don't have to requalify for a mortgage. Where here, if someone gets into a high interest rate, so I say, just refinance later.
Yeah.
But when you refinance here, it's like getting pre-qualified. Even with the person that you're already with, in order to refinance, you have to have the income, you have to have the credit score. So if anything changes, you may be stuck with that higher interest rate and can't refinance. So it's not as easy to refinance. That is my whole point to pointing this out.
Yeah.
Where in Canada, if they just say pick one, that's a completely different ballgame. Anytime you refinance, it is like qualifying for a new mortgage. You have to show, donate a kidney. You have to show absolutely everything.
Yeah,
Give them your firstborn.
sorry, and let me qualify. If you're refinancing, you're always going through that stuff as well. It's just if your mortgage is coming up because the term's ending, that's not necessary. You're not really refinancing. You're just signing up for another term. You're just choosing, okay, and with the bank that you're at. But if you're refinancing, meaning that let's say you've got a couple of loans that you would like to amalgamate, or you want to pull some money out of the property, you're refinancing. Then even with that current bank, you have to go through the whole thing because of the
Right.
fact
But
that now you're
that's a
asking
plus of Canada. If the term ends, that you can just pick it and they don't check if you still have a job. My concern was, what if you lose your job and then you don't? Because I have the mindset of what happens down here. Like
Right.
I was
Well-
thinking, oh my gosh, you're going to lose your house in 4 years if things change. So that's not the case.
Well, I think from our standpoint, our recommendation is always that if let's say both spouses lose a job or there's a divorce or something like that, you should be proactively phoning that bank to say, hey, here's my situation, and work out a plan together. That would be our recommendation is basically be transparent, let them know what's happening. Ultimately they would prefer to know what's happening and rather than get caught. And that goes with talking to lots of people in the financial industry when it comes to people that are getting into foreclosures, is that they go, there's so many things that could have been done to have avoided this, and usually the reason why it does go into foreclosure is because the person refused to accept and look at the various options that were there. They just simply decided, no, I'm going down with the ship here.
Okay. Well, so I mean, like, if someone's in between jobs at the time that you have to, here you have to have 6 months worth of employment at the same business. So, I mean, if something as dire as divorce, someone has to go through that, I completely understand. But let's say you're just in between jobs, or you're, if at that time you have to refinance, then you're out of luck here. So in Canada, you're at least protected that way. I'm
I
sticking
was
up for you. I'm sticking up for you, Devin. I'm sticking
Yeah,
up.
no, I'm sitting here going, like, again, as you said, we are not experts. We should
Yeah.
have people talk to their mortgage broker or their banker to make sure that this thing is fully accurate.
But Diane, you're saying that you'll stay on with a 30-year mortgage, but you would just might get stuck at a higher interest rate because you lost a job or there's been a
Yeah.
big change. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say that that was always a situation here. I think that, again, every situation is unique and individual. As you know, Diane, banks want payments. They don't want houses. So they're going to try anything. That was like, I remember we had a 6-month deferral. COVID hit in March, and everybody, the banks were allowing 6 months deferral where you didn't have to pay any mortgage principal or interest. And when that stuff started to kick back in again in September, October, I know a lot of our investors were thinking, Christmas is going to deliver thousands and thousands of foreclosures because people, they redline their finances. They're going to get used to not having those payments, and they're going to lose their house. Well, that never really did happen. The foreclosures never really kicked up at all because, the banks are going to take each individual situation and say, okay, what's going to work best here? I know in a couple of extreme situations, the deferrals were extended. And it literally was a deferral up here. It's not like basically you didn't have to pay that. They just tacked the 6 months of no principal payments onto the back end of your mortgage, and they recalculated the interest to say, okay, well, here's the 6 months that you didn't pay. We're now adding that 6 months into what's left on your mortgage, and so in a lot of cases, everybody's mortgage payments increased by $20 or $30 a month. The banks, they helped out by deferring for 6 months, but it wasn't that they just said, hey, you don't have to pay this. It was, no, you still have to pay this, but we're just going to tack it on to the end. And I think that caught a lot of people by surprise, but it didn't cause a number of foreclosures, except for people that probably would have gone into foreclosure anyways, despite COVID hitting. And
Banks did that down here too.
Yeah, and wasn't necessarily that people were losing jobs or various things like that. Like there was rental deferrals and all sorts of things like that. I just think that it was more a situation where people were on the brink anyways, and if something significant like COVID happened, which I would have put that in the same category as a divorce or a death or losing a job, because COVID caused all sorts of disruption in a lot of people's lives.
Okay, we're out of time.
We are, yes. Well, that was a
heavy
one.
To add in there, Diane.
Pardon?
You're definitely talking a lot about the Canada side. I just wanted to see if there's anything you have to add, or if you want to wrap it up for the show.
Well, we have the same thing here with the bank. So it's just a little clearer to me about how you're protected in Canada when your terms ended, because I was under the impression like, wow, if you lose your jobs, then what are you going to do in 4 or 5 years when the term, thinking that it's the refinance process like it is down here. So good clarification.
Right.
I'm back on board. Bye, Canada.
Okay. Yeah.
You're back on the train again.
Yeah. If that was the case, there'd be a lot of foreclosures, a lot of homeless people.
Yeah, well, that's why I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, so anybody watching who wants to know more details, if you're moving down to the States, especially around the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, make sure to get in touch with Diane. Diane, how can they get a hold of you?
Sure. My number is 602-620-2277. And my email is, can't remember her email. And website is thatrealestateshow.com.
And same with you, Devin. How do they get a hold of you in Canada?
Cell number is 780-951-9279. Email is Devin, DEVIN, at mogulrg.com. I'm with eXp Realty. That's my brokerage. And the company is the Mogul Realty Group, specializing on investment properties for real estate investors.
We'd also like to thank our dog Toby for joining us at the beginning of
for
the
the
show.
snoring. Yeah.
For acoustics.
And you too, Tracie. Thank you very much. And we have all our information down in the show notes as well. So
yeah. So, and write your comments and questions in there. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. This is Alberta to Arizona. Have a great week.